3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of Americans failing to vote. So throughout American history, important elections have always existed, where depending on which candidate wins an election, there could be major consequences for the country for years to come. However, these outcomes were also always avoidable. For example, take the 1968 election between Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey. Nixon would win this election by only 0.7%, yet only 63% of eligible voters would vote. Thus, if more Americans voted, who knows what the outcome would have been? Because there is always a choice that can be made in an election. Two candidates are never the same, nor never equally bad. Yet, almost 40% of Americans decided to stay home, believing that it didn't really matter how they voted. As a result, Richard Nixon would submit his control. Richard Nixon would cement his control as president and even get reelected for a second term in 1972. But the damage he would cause the U.S. would live on much longer than his two-term presidency, because the Nixon administration would be marred with scandals. He targeted journalists, attacking the free speech of his critics. His vice president was convicted of tax fraud. And he also became well known for the Watergate scandal, where Nixon oversaw a plot to illegally spy on the Democratic National Headquarters, which would be the cause of his eventual downfall, where he would resign as president, ultimately highlighting that elections do matter. But this is not the only example, because next we have the 2000 presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. Bush would win this election by only one state, despite losing the popular vote. And this was due to a controversial ruling to not allow a vote recount in the state of Florida. However, beyond that, again, only 54% of eligible voters would vote. Thus, a higher turnout rate could have easily changed the election results. Instead, Bush would take the presidency and also get reelected again later, beating John Kerry in 2004. However, Bush's presidency would have devastating effects on America. For example, the infamous 9/11 attacks would occur under his administration, changing the nation forever, and then leading the United States to recklessly invade Iraq under the false assumption that they were building nuclear weapons, or as the Bush administration called, weapons of mass destruction. And they would also unsuccessfully invade Afghanistan, trying to go after the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks, like Osama bin Laden. And though the U.S. would eventually get Osama bin Laden, the U.S. would really fail when it came to changing the country forever. They got a lot of the terrorists they were trying to get, but the country is still in the hands of a terrorist organization today. And these were both incredibly costly wars, which both failed to achieve their ultimate goals, which is not only defeating these enemies. For example, Saddam Hussein was taken out of power, and the Taliban was taken out of power in Afghanistan, but would then return later. And neither country turned into the democracies we had hoped they would become. Beyond these failed wars, though, the Bush administration was also caught bribing journalists to write positive articles about their policies. And on top of this, the Great Recession of 2008 would also occur under the Bush administration, sinking the nation's economy and having a horrible impact on the lives of many people. People that had their lives fundamentally changed because of that recession. And then we have the 2016 election, where Donald Trump faced off against Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump would lose the popular vote, but win the election. However, only 60% of Americans would vote. Again, highlighting that if more people were willing to vote, the election results could have been different. Instead, Trump would go on to become the most scandalous and anti-democratic president in American history. The number of controversies surrounding him are numerous, but some of the biggest include trying to extort Ukraine to provide negative information on his 2020 presidential opponent, Joe Biden, which resulted in him being impeached by the House of Representatives. And of course, he tried to overturn the 2020 election results and inspired an attack on the U.S. Capitol, which would get him impeached again. And those are the two big scandals that people remember the most, yet he still did plenty of other things. For instance, he made millions of dollars in office from taxpayer money because he and other people in his administration kept staying at his own hotels. Thus, as president, he was literally billing the United States government, funded by taxpayer dollars, so that he could stay at his own hotels with other people in his administration. Beyond this, he would also make millions of dollars from countries like Saudi Arabia and China, who were also routinely staying at his hotels, obviously to try and influence him. And in general, as president, because he refused to sell off his businesses, which, given how much of a business empire he has, that's quite a conflict of interest if you're a president. But because he didn't do it, he ended up making a profit of $2.4 billion while in office as president. And here we are today in 2024. And despite former President Donald Trump losing the last election, which he still refuses to accept, in 2024, we are running this back again because the drama surrounding President Trump continues as he is now running the 2024 election as the Republican nominee for the third straight time, but this time against Kamala Harris. The question is, though, will enough people turn out to vote to prevent a return of Donald Trump, or will an emboldened Donald Trump return to the presidency? At the end of the day, if you are an undecided voter, the choices you have couldn't be more different. And certainly, because this happens all the time in American presidential elections, especially lately, where we have people promoting the idea that the lesser of two evils is still evil. However, ultimately, that's just a cop-out. Clearly, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are not equally bad. After all, one candidate believes in democracy and the other doesn't. Thus, if you were to vote for Harris, it would mean 4 years of Harris, and if you don't like her, you could vote her out of office. Because she would accept the election results if she were to lose 4 years from now, or if she loses the 2024 election. If Trump wins, though, we can't be sure that he won't try to stay in office the rest of his life just because he does not care. And there may just be enough gutless people in government to let him. We really don't know. This is uncharted territory. I mean, the Supreme Court recently ruled that for official acts, President Trump or any other president can technically do whatever they want. They're immune from prosecution. So who's to say that Donald Trump couldn't decide, well, as president, it's an official act to stay in power longer than my term limits just because this is a national security crisis and I have to do it for the country. Now, would the Supreme Court say, no, that's not what we meant by official acts? I hope so, but we really just don't know because the Supreme Court has not shown itself to be very reliable when it comes to making high-quality decisions for the country. Thus, electing Donald Trump again really is like putting American democracy in the hands of a wolf in sheep's clothing. So if you're going to vote in an election at all in your life, this is probably the one to do it because this really is going to be a historical election that will become a major part of American history for the foreseeable future. So the choice will be ours come November. As always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.